This may be the most important act of leadership that you are ever confronted with in your professional lives. We have a choice in our organizations. We can bring joy in every day, or we can do things the way we've always done them. In the past, perhaps joy was optional. Today, it is essential. Our competitors are chasing us, and if we can't outrun them, we will not survive. Most leaders think that authority and hierarchy is the way to get things done. And while that can often be expedient, the truth is, it is influence that moves our organizations forward. The statistics are clear. Most organizations have 60 or 70% of their workforce disengaged. You go from the land of never getting anything done to the land of never getting anything started. This is happening all over the world. This wasn't unique to the software industry. Our organizations need a different plan. I needed a different plan. And at that moment, suddenly all became clear, and I changed everything. As leaders, it is imperative that we figure out how to light the flames of joy in the hearts of the people who work for us so that they will bring their whole selves to work. How much does joy cost? How much will it take away from the bottom line so I can bring joy into the team? And I tell them this is not a zero-sum game. Joy actually adds to the bottom line. The impact it can have in your organization can be infinite. We switch from an organization that's contemplating everything every day and not making any decisions to one that takes action every single day. This is the opportunity for all of you as leaders in your organization. Bring joy home, spread joy to the world. We are at the vanguard of what it takes to build a new kind of organization in our world, one centered on the relevant principles of what will get our teams off the ground every day. We will be able to fly to heights and distances that were previously unimaginable in our organizations, and we can do it with joy. Let's run the experiment. One other thing you should know about me, I'm a private pilot. I haven't flown for a few years, but I got my private pilot's license back in those early days when I was 19 years old. So by analogy, I'm going to relate the forces at work on a human organization to the forces at work on an aircraft. I'm sure many of you get on planes all the time, but probably don't think a lot about what does it take to get that plane off the ground every single time safely. Well, if we look at the aeronautics of an aircraft, you know that there's this element called lift that literally, based on the way the wings are shaped, lifts the aircraft off the ground. There's a countervailing force of weight and gravity that wants to keep the airplane on the ground. There has to be more lift than weight in order for the airplane to rise. To get to our destination, there's this element of thrust, provided either by a propeller-driven engine or a jet engine, but this is what gets us to our destination. But there's also that countervailing force that holds us back, the force of drag, just the wind resistance from the aircraft itself. All of these forces are at work together. But if lift doesn't exceed weight and thrust doesn't exceed drag, that airplane is never getting off the ground. And so, how does this relate to human organizations? Well, I would declare to you that the lift of an organization is provided by human energy. This is probably one of the most squandered resources in corporations today. The statistics are clear. Most organizations have 60 or 70% of their workforce disengaged. So how do we get human energy into an organization? Well, there are simple things like laughter. That brings human energy. But I would tell you that clarity over ambiguity and the ability to get meaningful things done at work will lift the energy of your team. The countervailing weight, the thing that holds us down, is the weight of bureaucracy. This is probably all too familiar to many of you in the corporate world, where at a certain level of the organization, executives are often considered human sacrifices to meeting load. Just going from one meeting to the next, waiting outside the conference room from one meeting to end so you can get in. And the part that really drags down a team is the idea of slow or no decision making whatsoever. The thrust that pulls us forward is the thrust of purpose. And I will declare to you, the kind of purpose that really drives an organization isn't the typical ones that you'll find on the annual report of a corporation, but rather the thrust of external purpose, focused on the idea of who do we serve and what would delight look like for them. And the biggest drag on organizations today is the drag of fear. Fear often perpetuated by simple managerial moves like micromanaging and questioning the decisions of everyone who works for you. So these are the things we need to think about when we're creating the systems that drive our organizations. So how do we do that? Well, I will tell you that systems thinking is a big part of this. The part you probably don't know about the aircraft you get on is that there are some subtle design features that you need to take into consideration. If you ever look at an aircraft, you'll notice the wings aren't actually out straight. They're tilted up just a little bit, not a lot, just a bit. In aeronautical terms, we call that the dihedral. Okay, and that simple tip up of the wings actually is very important because what it produces is positive stability. Have you been on an aircraft where you're flying along straight and level on a nice long flight and all of a sudden the plane goes ta-tunk and your stomach leaps and you hope you're going to be okay and you're happy that the pilot got you back on track, and actually it wasn't the pilot at all, it was the aircraft itself. The aircraft itself is designed to be positively stable, to get back to straight and level flight simply by the way it's designed, by tilting those wings up just a little bit. I want you to think about that when you think about organizations. What systems could we put in place that could create that kind of positive stability where the very design of the organization itself could actually get you back to normal operations as quickly as possible? There's one other fun thing about aircraft, and the words are so perfect, both for the aircraft and for the human organizations, I couldn't resist to share this with you. When everything is designed right and the pilot puts the thrust full down the runway, and that plane is getting ready to take off and it hits just the right speed, all the pilot has to do is pull back just a little bit on the yoke and create a positive attitude. And as soon as that positive attitude is created, we have liftoff. Think about the analogy of positivity in our workplaces and how that simple leadership move could create an amazing effect on an entire organization around us. Shortly after the Wright brothers discovered how to get that airplane off the ground and achieve man-powered flight for the first time in 1903, Orville Wright was interviewed, and he declared to the world that we would never be able to build an aircraft that could carry more than 2 people. I was reading that story on a 747 from Detroit to London in the early 90s, flying at 35,000 feet at 500 miles per hour with 400 passengers on board, 50,000 gallons of fuel in total creature comfort. So it is clear that once we discover the relevant principles, we can fuel the human energy of our team, because the same principles that apply to aircraft apply to human organizations. And then we can fly to heights and distances with our teams that were previously unimaginable. And this is the work of leadership. This is the call to joy. If we can get joy in our organizations, we can outrun our competition. We can outrun the constant change that's going on in our world today. And we are at the vanguard of what it takes to do this. The books you are now reading, the organizations you're beginning to admire are the ones that have harnessed these fundamental principles of getting our organizations off the ground every single day without fanfare, but with joy. There is absolutely no question that we want joy in our lives. Joy in our families, in our schools, in our communities, in our neighborhoods. But in our workplaces, seriously, Rich? Yep, I'm the guy who declared on the cover of a book, a business book, that we should bring joy and love into the workplace. And I have to admit, I had no idea how seriously I was going to be taken. The number of talks I now give around the world about bringing joy into a workplace has astounded even me. But in order to understand where this joyful intent came from, you have to know a little bit about my personal story. I started out in life as a programmer back in 1971. Yes, kids, there were in fact computers back in 1971. I know that's difficult to imagine. I was just a little kid back then, but I typed a 2-line program into a computer and it clacked out on a roll of paper because that's the way they used to work in those days. And it said, "Hi, Rich," because that's what I told it to do. And I was hooked. I knew at 13 what I was going to do the rest of my days. My kids are still astounded by that. They're like, "Seriously, Dad, you decided at 13 years old what you're going to do the rest of your life." Well, I'm 61 now, and I can tell you that I'm still in the same industry, so I think I've decided. By 1973, I had typed the entire baseball register into the computer. All of the major league players, their averages, the positions they played, whether they were right or left-handed, so that my friends and I could play baseball on the computer in the cold Michigan winter months. Yep, you're looking at the guy who invented fantasy baseball. My life is probably littered with lost opportunities like this. But I entered that program into an international programming contest and I won. And that landed me my first job as a programmer before I could even drive a car. And I stayed working through high school graduation, but eventually went up to the University of Michigan, got 2 degrees in computer science and computer engineering, and in 1982, my professional career was launched. And the career that followed, I will tell you, looked perfect. From programmer in 1982 to vice president of R&D in 1997, for the company Interface Systems that would be declared the #1 public company in Michigan in 1999 based on stock growth. The stock went from $2 a share to $80 almost overnight. I had everything the world measured as success. Every year, raises, promotions, more stock options, greater authority, bigger title, bigger office, larger team. But there was a different line going on in my life. And it looked like this. My heart was breaking for the industry that I thought would carry me for a lifetime. The one that was feeding my family, keeping a roof over our heads. And I wanted out. So what was going on? How could it be that I had all this success that the world measures as success, and yet my heart was breaking for my chosen profession, one that I was well trained for, well schooled in, and passionate about? Well, I will tell you, in the software industry, we often operate in chaos. Chaos is easy to imagine. You come in the front door, phones are ringing off the hook with problems, people are pounding fists on tables in meetings, you're missing deadlines, you're blowing budgets. and the days are long. I would often come home after some of those long days, sometimes all-nighters, and my wife would look at tired me and she'd say, honey, you look really tired. Did you get a lot done today? And then it dawned on me, no, I got nothing done today. I was busy from one end of the day to the other. I was spent a lot of time in meetings, but absolutely nothing done. And I can tell you, if you live in chaos too long, bad things happen. Negative events. The one I write about in my first book is about a tired programmer at Knight Capital Group. He made a simple server software update error on Knight Capital Group's New York Stock Exchange trading platform, and in the next 45 minutes, traded $7 billion worth of securities it wasn't supposed to, costing Knight Capital Group $400 million in losses in 45 minutes. Would that be considered a negative event where you work? You know, there's an old saying in computing, to err is human, but to really foul things up requires a computer, and I think this is a good example of that. When there are negative events, there is typically a corporate response. It often looks like a big 3-ring binder. In the software industry, we give it an acronym. We call it the SDLC, the Software Development Lifecycle Binder. And all it does is prescribe meetings and committees and policies and procedure reviews and lines for approval and sign-offs. You go from chaos to full-blown bureaucracy. You have to put a project management office, a project management police force in charge of making sure all the forms are signed. And when moving from chaos to bureaucracy, you go from the land of never getting anything done to the land of never getting anything started. You're waiting. You're waiting for an approval, for a committee to meet, for a meeting to happen. And yet things still have to happen, so shadow groups form. You start placating the bureaucracy while continuing to operate in chaos. And now you're living in the worst possible version of this environment. You're living in chaos and bureaucracy simultaneously. Now I can even tell by looking out at all of you that the way you're whispering back and forth to one another, that you're asking the person next to you, who has he been talking to where we work? He's just described our environment. I can tell you this is happening all over the world. This wasn't unique to the software industry. Our organizations need a different plan. I needed a different plan. I have a big takeaway for you because I know how this works. You come here to be inspired. You get a new idea. You hear it from somebody like me, or a session you attend after the keynote, or maybe a colleague you talk with out in the hall. And when you get back to work the next day, you're so excited because you have a brand new idea and you want to bring it into your office. And the first person you meet, you grab them and you say, I have this great big new idea. And they look at you and say, that won't work here. That's not us. That's against policy. I want to arm you with one simple response, and it is this. Look them in the eye and say, I get it, but let's try something. Let's run the experiment and see what happens. Now let me tell you how this played out in my life. 11 years ago, Tracy had little Maggie. She took a few months off of maternity leave. We had a new project beginning, and she wanted to be back on the project. She came up to me and she said, Rich, I'm ready to come back to work. And I said, awesome, how soon can you be here? She said, well, there's the problem. The daycare we planned to put Maggie in is full. The grandparents live too far away to help. My husband and I don't know what to do. And at that moment, there was a screaming match in my brain that Tracy never heard. You've probably had these. You know, the dark voice and the bright voice? And the dark voice said, don't you dare say what you're about to say. HR will shoot you. The lawyers will freak. The insurance policies will go through the roof. The bright voice said, it's your company, you can do whatever you want. You're an entrepreneur. You don't even have an HR department. So I looked at Tracy and I said, bring her in. Oh, if I'd only had a camera in that moment to catch the look of bewilderment on her face. She said, what do you mean? I said, bring her into work. And she said, all day? And I said, sure. She said, every day? And I said, why not? And she said, Rich, where will I put her? We work in this big open room. I said, Tracy, she's 3 months old. She's not going anywhere. Just put her in a bassinet on the floor wherever you're working. This was not a daycare option. The baby was going to be with mom all day. And she said, what if she makes a fuss? I said, here, it's like a noisy restaurant. You'll never hear it. And she said, come on, Rich. You've raised 3 girls. What if she makes that big baby fuss that destroys the ambiance of the whole place? And I looked at her and I said, Tracy, you're the mom. I trust you. You'll do the right thing. We'll work it out together. Let's run the experiment. Joy. This is what we brought into work when we brought in the babies. Imagine that when you have contact with the world wants to be more like you because you have brought joy not only into your workplace, but into the hearts and the spirits of the people you interact with as a company every single day. This is the opportunity we have. We are at the edge of an entirely new way to do business in the world. And my encouragement to you when you go back home is to bring joy into your organizations. Thank you very much.